What is up, everybody? Welcome back if you've been here before, and if it's your first time here, it is nice to meet you. My name is Dr. Brandon Osborne. I am the Director of Training here at Momentum WOD. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a strength training routine from one of your favorite combat sports athletes. We're going to break down that routine, we're going to pick it apart piece by piece, looking at what we like, what we don't like, and what you can take for your own routine at home to implement and make changes with to better your own performance training. Today we're looking at a UFC athlete who has been in the game for quite some time, somebody who personally I am a fan of, and I know I say that every week, but this is true. We are looking at the routine of TJ Dillashaw. TJ is a former Bantamweight champion on 2 separate occasions, I believe, and he is one of the most technical fighters in the game. His background is wrestling, his striking is off the charts, his conditioning is off the charts, and a large part of that is a byproduct of his strength training. TJ takes a very scientific approach to his training, utilizing a lot of different metrics and markers to determine how hard to train, when to train, what to train. But when it comes to his training, he has a very regimented and specific approach. So today we're going to break down one of his videos, and we're going to do something a little bit different today as well. I'm going to teach you how you can take what he's doing and do it at home using only one piece of equipment. And if you could guess what piece of equipment it is, I think you'd probably guess correctly, because we are going to be using a kettlebell as our equipment of choice. So without further ado, let's take a look at TJ Dillashaw's strength training routine. Alright, so we're kicking off the videos. TJ is on the squat rack. He's performing front rack squats, and let's see how he's doing here. So I'm making the assumption, he's using a barbell, he's got bumper plates on each side. I'm making the assumption that he's using at least a moderate to heavy weight. We'll say somewhere between 135 to 225 pounds. It's hard to tell exactly how much he's using. One of the biggest criticisms people have with kettlebell training is that you can't replicate an exercise like this because you can't train heavy. And while part of that is true to an extent, that whole statement is not true at all. You can't train heavy in the same way, but you can still get the same benefits out of an exercise that you would with a barbell. And let me explain and break that down a little bit more. So how would we perform this exercise at home using one kettlebell? First, what we do is we determine what type of squat we want to utilize. If we're trying to mimic a front rack squat, what I would use first and foremost would probably be a goblet squat. It's going to replicate the positioning and the load of this sort of movement. So when you're going through a goblet squat, the limiting factor, in contrast to using a barbell, is going to be your upper extremities as opposed to your lower extremities. Your arms are going to fatigue likely before your legs do if you're using a heavy weight. For that reason, you're not going to be able to mimic the weight that you're using with a barbell squat. So the way that we would reproduce this exercise in a slightly different way is we would change a different variable associated with the exercise, and that variable would be the tempo. So TJ, we'll say, is performing this exercise at about a 1 count down and a 1 count up. If you're using a kettlebell that is of moderate weight, slow that tempo down. A 3 count down or a 5 count down, you will get very similar benefits to what he is doing, just in a different way of performing it, meaning using a different piece of equipment. So that would be the way that I would approach this exercise if you still want to get the benefits of a heavy squat without having heavy weight. And we'll talk a little bit more about the use of leg exercises in jiu-jitsu in particular, but in combat sports as a whole, a little bit later on. So the second exercise we're going to break down, we've looked at this one in the past. He's doing an alternating chest press. He's using what are the equivalent of dumbbells. And as TJ's working through this, he's alternating, which I like, because he's got one dumbbell in a static position. So he's working a little bit of muscular endurance at the same time working pressing power and strength. With one kettlebell, you can do this one of 2 ways, but the 2 we're going to talk about would be a dead bug iso hold, which you would have your legs off the ground performing alternating patterning of your legs while maintaining the bell in a static position out in front of you. And then you could also just do a press from that dead bug position as well, which will work pressing power, strength, core stability. It's going to have applications, especially when you're in bottom positions trying to create distance, so that your ability to press and then shrimp out of the way, or your ability to do that, is going to largely be predicated on your ability to create distance in the posterior chain of your lower extremities and your posterior chain of your upper extremities. Alright, so this exercise, TJ looks very upset. He's throwing a ball against a wall, trying to put a hole through it. And this was the exercise where I had to pause and think a little bit. How do we recreate this movement with a kettlebell, with one kettlebell? And I thought and I pondered a little bit. You know, it's a rotational movement. There's a little bit of an emphasis on one side of the body as opposed to the other. He's generating a lot of power. His core is involved. How would we do that with one kettlebell? So I racked my brain a little bit and I thought of two different exercises that we could utilize to mimic this motion and this muscular activation patterns that throwing a medicine ball against a wall will produce. So the way I would do this, one of two ways. First, you could do a cross-body chop. You can do that in a kneeling or a standing position. The key is that you want to be powerful as you work your way through that movement, but you also want to be controlled. The second way involves the use of an advanced exercise, one that you should probably only be performing if you're proficient with at least a 2-arm kettlebell swing and a 1-arm kettlebell swing, and that is called the kettlebell slingshot. This exercise does not come naturally, so it's something you would have to practice the motion of. And then after mastering the basics of it and getting it down, the hinging motion of it, the hip extension, those sorts of things, you could add a little rotation at the end. After you catch the bell, quickly rotate to the side to mimic the rotation of throwing the ball against the wall. But even if you don't include that, you're still working a lot of the same components that this exercise is working. That little extra bit on the end, I think, creates almost an identical experience to what throwing the ball would be in TJ's workout. So that would be my interpretation of this as a kettlebell exercise. We have a planking exercise. TJ is on a physio ball. He's lifting, alternating his legs off of the ground as he's doing so. Planks are great exercises. I think they're very underutilized because they are looked as almost as like a yoga exercise, but there's a lot of benefits to performing planks as a muscular endurance exercise and a core stability exercise. And the thing that planks do that a lot of traditional core exercises don't is that they're going to keep your back safe. They're going to keep you from getting injured because your spine is in a neutral position when you're performing them, as opposed to crunches, sit-ups, whatever you want to call them, which are fairly detrimental to your back. This exercise is not going to have the same negative impact on that area of your body. The thing about planks, if you're just performing a regular straight arm plank or on your elbows, the issue with it is it's static, so it's not dynamic. It's not going to be a functional movement that's representative of something you're doing in the sport. But once you start adding movement to it, as TJ is doing, it becomes a much more functional exercise. So once again, with kettlebells, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. The way that I would say most closely resembles what he's doing is just a regular straight arm plank where you're tapping the bell that's out in front of you. You want to keep your butt nice and level with the rest of your body. So there's a tendency to put that butt up in the air as you're doing it. Drop that butt down. Will really test your core while you're adding some dynamic movement to the exercise. Moving on to some pull-ups. If you have an outdoor gymnasium or a jungle gym nearby, you can just do those there. I wouldn't mess with pull-ups too much. It's a very simple exercise. It really doesn't require any equipment. You just have to find somewhere that you can hang from. But any sort of posterior chain exercise for the upper extremities is going to mimic the same muscular activation patterns. Push-ups, pretty straightforward. I wouldn't change too much. He's doing it with a weight vest on. It's not really needed. And once again, if you really want to get more out of the exercise without any weight, just slow down the tempo. But you can perform this with a kettlebell, having your hand on the bell, or my personal preference is to combine movements, perform a plank pull through, and in between each repetition of that exercise, perform a push-up. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 there. And the last exercise TJ's doing here in this video is just a dumbbell lunge, and you know, he's inside at a gym. He can't kick his shoes off. You know the deal. Don't wear shoes when you're doing this. Yeah, with the kettlebell, easy to do. Put it in a goblet position, do just as he's doing. Or what you can do is you can put it in a front rack, which would be my personal preference, which is going to make it an asymmetrical exercise. And as a result, you're going to have to stabilize that position more as you're going through those dynamic movements. The thing I want to talk about with regards to this exercise in particular is I think there's a little bit of confusion as to why would somebody who trains jiu-jitsu in particular want to be performing some sort of a lunging movement? Why would that be valuable to include in your strength training program? That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. Knee injuries are so prevalent within the sport of combat sports, that umbrella, that we need to do things to help to strengthen and stabilize the surrounding areas to protect our knees so we can avoid suffering that same fate. Lunges are one of the best dynamic stabilization exercises for the knees, for the ankles. It's a great mobilization exercise for the hips. So for those reasons, just for the fact that you can prevent injury by doing this exercise is reason enough to include it into your routine. Front lunges, side lunges, rear lunges, whatever direction you want to lunge, I would do it and incorporate it into your routine, because the value of not being sidelined with injury is astronomical when it comes to the sport. And that does it for TJ's strength training routine. It was a full body routine. He had some pushing movements, he had some pulling movements, he had some lower body movements. There was nothing from a technique standpoint that I really want to critique about what he was doing, but if you want to take those exercises, which are fairly fundamental but valuable exercises, and incorporate them into your strength training routine at home with one kettlebell, that would be the way that I would go about doing so. I hope you have found value in the things that I've had to share with you today. I have had fun with this video. Once again, I am a fan of TJ Dillashaw. I'm eager to see his return to the octagon whenever that happens to be. If this video has provided you with value, insight, and information that you have found informative, you owe it to yourself. Hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, leave me a comment below. Let me know what you want to hear me talk about next, or who you want to see me break down in our next technique critique. Also, before I head my separate way, I almost forgot to tell you, we have a free 7-day trial of our kettlebell performance training system over at MomentumWOD.com. There is a link in the description below. If that is something that piques your interest, I highly suggest you check it out. There is no credit card needed. You head over there, put in your email address, and you are good to go. With that being said, I am Dr. Brandon Osborne. I am signing off for the day. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Until next time, I will see you then.